I did all the planning for our European adventure, but my boyfriend kept creating disasters, then getting mad at me for not fixing them fast enough. His true colors finally showed. I just got back from what was supposed to be an amazing 10-day backpacking trip through Europe with my boyfriend Robbie, 28M. Instead, I spent most of it babysitting a grown man who can't handle basic adult responsibilities. The final straw happened 3 nights ago in Prague, and I'm still processing everything that went down. Let me start with the disaster that set the tone for our entire trip. Robbie and I had been planning this backpacking adventure for 6 months. We saved up money, booked our flights, and mapped out our route through Amsterdam, Berlin, Prague, and Vienna. I handled most of the planning because Robbie always says he's bad with details, but I figured once we were actually traveling, he'd step up. The morning of our departure, we arranged to meet at the train station at 5:30 a.m. to catch the 6:15 a.m. train to the airport. Robbie lives about 45 minutes away from me by public transport. I texted him the night before reminding him about the time and even sent him screenshots of the train schedule. He promised he'd be there by 5:20 a.m. At 5:30 a.m., I stood alone at the platform with both our heavy backpacks. No Robbie. I called him 5 times. Nothing. The train arrived and I had to make a choice, wait for him and potentially miss our flight, or go ahead. I decided to wait for the next train, which would get us to the airport with barely enough time. Robbie finally showed up at 5:55 a.m., running and out of breath. His excuse was that his phone died overnight and he woke up late. This wasn't the first time something like this happened. Robbie has this pattern of being late to important things and always having some technical excuse. His phone died, his alarm didn't work, his app crashed. We made it to the airport with 30 minutes to spare before our gate closed. While I was checking us in online during the train ride, Robbie realized he couldn't find his passport. He started dumping everything out of his backpack right there on the airport floor. People were staring. I helped him look through everything twice before he found it wedged in a guidebook. The trip started going downhill from day one. In Amsterdam, Robbie forgot to bring the portable charger we specifically bought for the trip. When his phone died while we were trying to navigate to our hostel, he just shrugged and said I could handle the directions. I ended up carrying both our phones, the map, the itinerary, and doing all the navigation for the entire trip. In Berlin, we were supposed to take turns booking our daily activities. When it was Robbie's turn, he spent 2 hours on his phone trying to figure out museum tickets while I sat in the hostel lobby waiting. He couldn't understand the German website and kept asking me to help him. I ended up booking everything myself because we were wasting half our day. But Prague is where everything completely fell apart. We had been in the city for 2 days, and I was already exhausted from constantly having to solve problems Robbie created. He had lost his Metro card twice, forgotten to pack socks for 3 days straight, and left his jacket at a restaurant, which meant we had to walk 20 minutes back to get it while our dinner reservation waited. On our 3rd night in Prague, we decided to go out to a nice restaurant I had researched and made reservations for. Robbie spent an hour getting ready, which I didn't mind, but then he couldn't find his wallet. This was becoming a pattern, Robbie losing important items and then panicking about it. He started tearing apart our shared hostel room, throwing clothes everywhere and getting increasingly agitated. Our roommates were trying to sleep, and I was mortified by the noise he was making. I helped him look for 20 minutes before suggesting we retrace his steps from earlier in the day. Robbie immediately got defensive and started raising his voice at me, saying I wasn't being helpful and that I should just give him money for dinner instead of making him search. The way he was speaking to me in front of strangers made me uncomfortable. I told him I wasn't comfortable lending him money when he could just find his wallet, and that we should cancel dinner and look properly. This is when Robbie really lost it. He started yelling about how I never support him and always make everything more difficult. He said I was controlling and that I don't trust him to handle anything. The irony wasn't lost on me, considering I had been handling everything for the entire trip because he kept messing things up. I walked out of the room and went to the hostel's common area to give him space to calm down and find his wallet. 30 minutes later, he came downstairs and told me he found it. It was in his backpack pocket where I had suggested looking first. Instead of apologizing for yelling at me, Robbie acted like nothing happened and said we should hurry to make our reservation. I told him I wasn't comfortable going to dinner after the way he spoke to me. This started another argument where he accused me of holding grudges and being dramatic. The next day, we were supposed to do a walking tour together. I woke up early and got ready, but Robbie was still sleeping at 9 a.m. when the tour started at 10 a.m. I tried to wake him up gently, but he got irritated and said he needed more sleep. I ended up going to the tour alone and spent the day exploring Prague by myself. That evening, Robbie was upset that I had gone without him. He said I should have tried harder to wake him up or reschedule the tour. I pointed out that we had talked about this tour for weeks and he knew what time it started. His response was that I know he's not a morning person and I should have planned better. This conversation revealed something that had been building up throughout the trip. Robbie expected me to manage his schedule, his belongings, his responsibilities, and his emotions. When I didn't do these things, he got angry at me instead of taking responsibility for himself. The final incident happened on our last night. We were walking back to the hostel after dinner when Robbie realized he didn't have the key card to our room. The hostel desk had closed for the night, and we were locked out. Robbie immediately started blaming me for not reminding him to bring the key. I had been carrying my own key the entire trip, just like every other adult guest to the hostel. I told Robbie that managing his key card wasn't my responsibility. He got agitated and said I was being unsupportive and that couples should help each other. I told him there's a difference between helping each other and one person carrying all the mental load. I explained that I had been managing everything for the entire trip, the schedules, the navigation, the bookings, the problem solving, while he just followed along and got upset when things went wrong. Robbie's response was that he never asked me to do those things and that I was choosing to be controlling. He said if I didn't want to handle the planning, I should have said something before the trip. This completely missed the point that he wasn't offering to take on any responsibilities himself. We ended up sleeping in the hostel lobby that night because there was no way to get another key until morning. Robbie spent most of the night complaining about how uncomfortable he was, as if it wasn't his fault we were in that situation. The next morning, we flew home separately because Robbie decided to extend his trip by 2 days without discussing it with me first. He texted me from the airport saying he booked a flight to visit his college friend in Munich and would be back later in the week. I'm now back home and have had 3 days to think about everything that happened. Robbie has been texting me asking when we can hang out and talk about planning our next trip together. He seems to think everything that happened was just normal travel stress and that we should move past it. I keep thinking about how I felt more relaxed and enjoyed myself more during the few hours I spent alone in Prague than I did during the entire rest of the trip with Robbie. I didn't have to worry about anyone else's schedule, belongings, or emotional state. I could just focus on experiencing the city. The trip made me realize that this pattern exists in our regular life too, but it was easier to ignore when we weren't together 24/7. Robbie is consistently late to plans we make, forgets important dates, and expects me to remember and manage things for both of us. When I try to talk to him about it, he gets defensive and says I'm being too demanding. I'm not sure if this is something that can be fixed or if it's just who Robbie is. The trip was supposed to be a fun adventure we shared together, but instead it felt like I was traveling with a teenager who needed constant supervision. Update 1. It's been 2 weeks since my original post, and Robbie finally came back from his extended Europe trip. The conversation we had when he got back revealed some things I wasn't expecting, and honestly made the situation more complicated. Robbie texted me the day before he flew back, asking if he could come over to talk and bring me souvenirs from Munich. I told him we could meet at a coffee shop instead because I needed some neutral ground for whatever conversation we were going to have. When I saw him at the coffee shop, the first thing he did was give me a detailed rundown of his extra 2 days in Munich. He talked for 15 minutes about the museums he visited, the food he tried, and how great it was to catch up with his college friend Dave. He seemed genuinely excited and relaxed in a way I hadn't seen during our entire Prague trip. I finally interrupted him and said we needed to talk about what happened during our trip. Robbie's expression immediately changed, and he said he was hoping we could just focus on the positive parts and move forward. I told him that wasn't possible for me, and I started explaining how his behavior during the trip had affected me. I talked about the pattern of irresponsibility, the way he handled problems, and how I felt like I was managing everything while he got upset at me for things that were his fault. Robbie listened without interrupting, which was unusual for him. When I finished, he was quiet for a long time. Then he said something I wasn't expecting at all. He told me that his friend Dave had pointed out some things during their 2 days together that made him think differently about our trip. Apparently, Robbie had been telling Dave about our arguments and the problems we had, expecting Dave to take his side. Instead, Dave asked Robbie some direct questions about the specifics of what happened. When Robbie described losing his wallet and getting upset at me for not helping enough, Dave asked him why finding his own wallet was my responsibility. When Robbie talked about sleeping in the lobby because he forgot the key card, Dave asked him why he expected me to remind him to bring something that was his. Robbie said that hearing these questions from Dave made him realize that maybe his perspective on our trip wasn't accurate. He admitted that he had been thinking of me as unsupportive, but Dave helped him understand that I had actually been doing more than my share of work. This was the first time Robbie had ever acknowledged that there might be an imbalance in how we handle responsibilities. I was honestly surprised to hear him say it. But then Robbie said something that made me realize we might have bigger problems than I thought. He told me that Dave had suggested Robbie might be happier with someone who enjoys taking care of details and managing things, because that's obviously something I'm good at and seem to like doing. I stopped him right there and asked what he meant by that. Robbie explained that Dave pointed out how I always seem to have everything organized and under control, so maybe I actually prefer being the one who handles planning and logistics. He said maybe we're just naturally suited for different roles in the relationship. I told Robbie that just because I'm capable of handling these things doesn't mean I want to be solely responsible for them. I explained that I take care of details because when I don't, things fall apart, like what happened throughout our entire trip. Robbie seemed confused by this. He said he always thought I enjoyed planning because I'm so good at it and I always seem to have opinions about how things should be done. He genuinely seemed to believe that I had been choosing to take on all these responsibilities because I wanted control. I asked him to think about what would happen if I just stopped doing all the planning and organizing. Robbie was quiet for a while, then admitted that he probably wouldn't pick up those tasks on his own. He said he's always been bad at that stuff and usually just waits for someone else to handle it. This conversation was revealing, but not in a good way. Robbie wasn't maliciously expecting me to manage everything. He genuinely didn't understand that these tasks needed to be done by someone, and that it was unfair for that someone to always be me. I realized that Robbie had gone through his entire adult life having other people handle logistics for him. In college, he lived in dorms where meals and housing were managed by the school. After college, he lived with roommates who took care of household management. At work, he has assistants and project managers who handle scheduling and coordination. Robbie had never actually been in a situation where he was solely responsible for managing his own life, let alone sharing that responsibility with a partner. When I explained this to him, Robbie got defensive again. He said he's perfectly capable of taking care of himself and that he had managed fine during his 2 extra days in Munich. I asked him for specifics about how he handled those 2 days. It turned out that Dave had planned their entire itinerary, made all the restaurant reservations, and handled the logistics of getting around the city. Robbie had just followed Dave's lead, exactly like he had followed mine during our trip. I pointed this out to Robbie, and he got quiet again. Then he said something that really bothered me. He told me that he doesn't understand why I'm making such a big deal about this, because most couples he knows have one person who handles planning and one person who handles other things. I asked him what other things he handles in our relationship. Robbie mentioned that he pays for dinners when we go out, carries heavy things for me, and fixes technical problems with my computer. The problem is, I never asked him to pay for all our dinners. He just started doing that early in our relationship and never discussed splitting costs with me. I'm perfectly capable of carrying my own things and would prefer to do so. And the technical problems he fixes are usually issues with software he installed on my computer in the first place. So Robbie was comparing major life management tasks, planning trips, remembering important dates, coordinating schedules, solving problems when they arise, with occasional favors that I didn't ask for and don't particularly need. I tried to explain the difference between these things, but Robbie seemed to think I was being unfair and nitpicky. He said relationships require compromise and that maybe I need to accept that we have different strengths. The conversation ended with both of us frustrated. Robbie said he felt like nothing he did was good enough for me, and I told him that I needed him to start taking responsibility for basic adult tasks, not be good enough at things I was already handling myself. We haven't talked since that coffee shop meeting. Robbie has been texting me occasionally with random updates about his day, as if we didn't have that conversation at all. He seems to be waiting for me to get over it and go back to how things were before. But I keep thinking about something Dave apparently said to Robbie. According to Robbie, Dave told him that some people are just naturally more organized and that Robbie shouldn't feel bad about letting his girlfriend handle things she's better at. This bothered me because it implies that managing basic life tasks is a special skill that only some people have, rather than something every adult should be capable of doing. It also suggests that it's acceptable for one person in a relationship to opt out of responsibilities because their partner is more competent. I've been thinking about other relationships I know, trying to figure out if Robbie is right about most couples working this way. My parents split household and planning tasks pretty evenly. My sister and her husband take turns managing different areas of their life together. My close friends seem to share responsibilities with their partners. I'm starting to wonder if Robbie has spent his whole life around people who enabled his learned helplessness, and now he genuinely believes this is normal. The more I think about it, the more I realize that this isn't just about trip planning or lost wallets. This is about Robbie's fundamental approach to life and relationships. He seems to believe that he can just coast through situations and someone else will handle whatever needs to be handled. I don't know if this is something that can change, or if Robbie even wants it to change. Based on our conversation, he seems pretty comfortable with the current arrangement and doesn't understand why I'm not. Update 2. It's been a month since my last update, and I just found out that Robbie has been telling his friends and family a completely different story about what happened during our Europe trip. This discovery has made me realize that we have much bigger problems than I originally thought. Last weekend, I ran into Robbie's sister Jenny at the grocery store. Jenny and I have always gotten along well, and she seemed genuinely concerned when she saw me. She asked how I was doing after what she called my panic attack in Prague. I had no idea what she was talking about. Jenny seemed surprised by my confusion and said that Robbie had told their whole family about how I had some kind of breakdown during the trip and became controlling and demanding. According to Robbie's version, I had gotten overwhelmed by travel stress and started micromanaging everything he did. Jenny said Robbie told them that I got upset with him for small mistakes like forgetting his room key, and that I refused to let him make any decisions about our itinerary. She said Robbie described me as being anxious and snappy throughout the trip, and that he had tried his best to be patient with me. I was completely shocked. This was not what happened at all. I told Jenny some of the actual events from our trip, Robbie being late to meet me at the train station, losing his wallet and yelling at me about it, forgetting the room key and then blaming me for not reminding him to bring it. Jenny looked confused and said that wasn't how Robbie had described any of those situations. According to him, I had gotten angry at him for being a few minutes late to the station, I had refused to help him look for his wallet when he was stressed about losing it, and I had made a big scene about the room key situation instead of just helping him solve the problem. I realized that Robbie had taken every situation where his irresponsibility created a problem and retold it as me being unreasonable about minor issues. He had completely reframed his behavior and my responses to make himself look like the patient, understanding partner dealing with an overly demanding girlfriend. Jenny could see how upset I was getting, and she told me that the family had been worried about me based on Robbie's stories. His parents had apparently been discussing whether they should reach out to me to offer support, because Robbie had made it sound like I was struggling with anxiety or some other issue. After talking to Jenny, I called my friend Lisa who had helped me plan parts of the Europe trip. I told her what Robbie had been saying about me, and Lisa got angry on my behalf. She reminded me of all the work I had put into planning the trip and how excited I had been about it beforehand. Lisa also told me something interesting. She said that a few weeks ago, she had run into Robbie's friend Dave at a bar. Dave had mentioned that Robbie seemed much happier and more relaxed during his extra days in Munich, and that maybe Robbie and I weren't compatible for traveling together. This bothered me because it suggested that Dave, who had supposedly helped Robbie understand his behavior during our trip, was actually reinforcing the idea that I was the problem. It made me wonder what version of events Robbie had really told Dave, and whether Dave's advice had been based on accurate information. I decided I needed to have another conversation with Robbie, but this time I wanted to address the fact that he had been misrepresenting what happened between us. I texted him and asked if we could meet to talk. Robbie seemed eager to get together, probably thinking I was ready to move past our issues. We met at the same coffee shop as before, and I immediately told him what Jenny had shared with me. Robbie looked uncomfortable when I brought up his conversations with his family. He said he had just been processing the trip with people who care about him, and that maybe his family had misunderstood some of what he said. I asked him to walk me through exactly what he had told them about specific incidents. When I brought up the room key situation, Robbie said he had told his family that we got locked out and I had gotten upset about it instead of just helping him figure out a solution. I pointed out that this wasn't what happened. I explained that he had immediately blamed me for not reminding him to bring his key, and that I had told him managing his belongings wasn't my responsibility. I said that I hadn't refused to help solve the problem. I had helped him figure out that we needed to sleep in the lobby until morning. Robbie got defensive and said that maybe we remembered the situation differently, but the important thing was how it made him feel in the moment. He said that even if his facts weren't completely accurate, his emotional experience of feeling unsupported was still valid. This response really bothered me. Robbie was essentially saying that it didn't matter if he was telling people things that weren't true, because he felt justified in doing so based on his interpretation of events. I asked him about the wallet situation and how he had described that to his family. Robbie admitted that he had told them I wasn't helpful when he was stressed about losing it, but he said that was how it felt to him at the time. I reminded him that I had spent 20 minutes helping him search the room, that I had suggested retracing his steps, and that he had yelled at me for not being supportive enough. Robbie said he didn't remember yelling, just that he was frustrated and I seemed impatient with him. This pattern continued as we discussed other incidents from the trip. Robbie consistently remembered situations in a way that minimized his responsibility and maximized my unreasonableness. When I corrected his version with specific facts, he would say that maybe we remembered things differently but his feelings about the situation were still valid. I told Robbie that there's a difference between having feelings about a situation and telling other people factually incorrect information about what happened. I said that when he tells his family I had a breakdown or panic attack, he's not just sharing his emotional experience, he's making claims about my mental health and behavior that aren't true. Robbie seemed genuinely surprised that I was upset about this. He said he wasn't trying to make me look bad, he was just talking through his own experience with people he trusts. He said that maybe he hadn't explained the situations perfectly, but he wasn't intentionally lying about anything. I asked Robbie if he understood how his version of events made me look to his family and friends. He was quiet for a while, then said he hadn't really thought about it from my perspective. This was when I realized that Robbie doesn't just have problems with responsibility and accountability, he also has problems with empathy and understanding how his actions affect other people. He had spent weeks telling people a story that made me look unreasonable and unstable, and it had never occurred to him to consider how that might impact me. I told Robbie that I needed him to correct the record with his family and friends. I said he needed to acknowledge that he had misrepresented some of what happened and explain the actual circumstances of our conflicts during the trip. Robbie said he would think about it, but he seemed reluctant. He said that bringing it up again would just make the situation more complicated and that maybe it would be better to just let people form their own opinions going forward. I told him that wasn't acceptable, because people had already formed opinions based on incorrect information he had given them. Robbie said he understood my point, but he didn't want to have awkward conversations with his family about relationship details. The conversation ended with Robbie promising to think about how to handle the situation, but I could tell he didn't really want to do anything about it. He seems to think that correcting his previous statements would be more trouble than it's worth. Since that conversation, I've been thinking a lot about what this reveals about Robbie as a person. He's not just irresponsible and defensive, he's also willing to throw me under the bus to make himself look better, even if he's not doing it consciously. I keep wondering how many other situations Robbie has reframed in his own mind to avoid taking responsibility. If he can convince himself that I was being unreasonable during our trip, what other conflicts has he reinterpreted to make himself the victim? I also can't stop thinking about his family and friends having this completely wrong impression of me. Some of these are people I've known for over a year and had good relationships with. Now they think I'm someone who has anxiety breakdowns and treats Robbie poorly. Robbie still hasn't reached out to correct anything with his family, and I'm starting to realize he probably never will. He seems to prefer the version of events where he's the long-suffering boyfriend dealing with a difficult girlfriend, rather than taking accountability for his own behavior. Final update, it's been 6 weeks since my last update, and I've made the decision to end my relationship with Robbie permanently. What finally pushed me to this point was discovering that his pattern of avoiding responsibility and rewriting history goes much deeper than I initially realized. 2 weeks after our coffee shop conversation, Robbie still hadn't said anything to his family about correcting the false narrative he had given them about our trip. When I brought this up to him over text, he said he was waiting for the right opportunity to bring it up naturally in conversation. I told him that he had created this problem by misrepresenting what happened, and he needed to actively fix it rather than waiting for a convenient moment. Robbie responded by saying I was being demanding again and that he would handle it in his own way and time. This response made it clear that Robbie had no intention of taking responsibility for the false story he had told his family. I realized that if he was willing to let his family continue believing I had mental health issues and treated him poorly, then he didn't respect me enough to be in a relationship with. I decided to end things with Robbie, but before I did, I wanted to understand more about his pattern of behavior. I called his ex-girlfriend Tiffany, who I had met a few times when we all hung out in groups. Tiffany and Robbie had dated for about 8 months, ending about 6 months before Robbie and I got together. Tiffany was initially hesitant to talk about Robbie, but when I explained some of what I had experienced, she opened up about her own relationship with him. What she told me was both validating and alarming. According to Tiffany, Robbie had displayed the same patterns of irresponsibility during their relationship. He was constantly late, forgot important plans, and expected her to manage most of the logistics of their relationship. When Tiffany tried to talk to him about it, Robbie would get defensive and accuse her of being controlling. But what really shocked me was what Tiffany told me about how their relationship ended. Robbie had told me that Tiffany broke up with him because she wanted to focus on her career and wasn't ready for a serious relationship. This made me think that Tiffany was the one who had commitment issues. The truth was completely different. Tiffany had broken up with Robbie because she found out he had been telling his friends and family that she was clingy and needy, when in reality she had been asking him to take on basic relationship responsibilities like planning dates occasionally and remembering important events. Tiffany said that Robbie's version of their relationship made it sound like she was constantly demanding his attention and getting upset when he wanted independence. In reality, she had been frustrated that Robbie never initiated plans, never remembered things that were important to her, and seemed to expect her to manage all aspects of their relationship while he just showed up. When Tiffany confronted Robbie about the things he had been saying about her, his response was similar to what I had experienced. He said that was just how the situation felt to him, and that maybe they remembered things differently. He never acknowledged that he had misrepresented her behavior or took steps to correct what he had told people. Tiffany also told me something that made me realize Robbie's problems might be even more serious than I thought. During their relationship, Robbie had borrowed money from her several times for various emergencies. His car needed repairs, he had unexpected medical bills, his rent was due early one month. Tiffany had lent him the money because she cared about him and wanted to help. But when she asked him to pay her back, Robbie always had reasons why he couldn't do it right away. Eventually, Tiffany realized that Robbie had no intention of paying her back and just expected her to absorb these costs as part of being his girlfriend. When Tiffany broke up with Robbie, he owed her almost $800. She asked him for a payment plan to get the money back, and Robbie told her that he thought the money was a gift, not a loan. He said that people in relationships help each other financially and that asking for it back was petty. Tiffany never got her money back. She said she learned an expensive lesson about Robbie's character and moved on rather than continuing to fight about it. After hearing Tiffany's story, I realized that Robbie had a long-standing pattern of taking advantage of the women he dated and then rewriting history to make himself look like the victim when they got tired of it. I also realized that Robbie had probably told me a false story about why every previous relationship he had ended. He always made it sound like his ex-girlfriends had issues with commitment or were too demanding, when it seemed more likely that they had gotten fed up with his irresponsible behavior. Armed with this information, I decided to end things with Robbie immediately rather than trying to work through our issues. I sent him a text message explaining that I was ending our relationship because I didn't trust him to be honest about his behavior or take responsibility for his actions. Robbie responded with a long series of texts saying that I was overreacting and that every relationship has problems that need to be worked through. He said he was willing to try harder and that I was giving up too easily. I didn't respond to these messages. Instead, I blocked Robbie's number and all of his social media accounts. 3 days later, Robbie showed up at my apartment building. The building has a buzzer system, and he kept pressing my button and asking me to let him come up so we could talk. I told him through the intercom that I had nothing to say to him and asked him to leave. Robbie refused to leave and said he was going to wait until I came down to talk to him. I told him that if he didn't leave immediately, I would call the police. Robbie said I was being dramatic and that he just wanted to have a conversation. I called the police. When the officers arrived, Robbie was still standing outside my building. The police talked to him and explained that he needed to leave and not come back. Robbie told the officers that this was just a misunderstanding between him and his girlfriend, and that we could work it out if I would just talk to him. One of the officers came up to my apartment and spoke with me. I explained that I had broken up with Robbie and asked him to leave me alone, but he was refusing to respect my boundaries. The officer told me that they had explained to Robbie that he couldn't loiter around my building or contact me if I didn't want him to. The officer also suggested that I document any further attempts Robbie made to contact me, in case I needed to get a restraining order. After the police incident, I didn't hear from Robbie for about a week. Then I started getting messages from his family members. His sister Jenny texted me asking if we could talk because she was worried about Robbie. His mother called me and left a voicemail saying that Robbie was very upset and she hoped we could work things out. I didn't respond to any of these messages. I realized that Robbie was now using his family to try to get around the boundaries I had set, just like he had used them earlier to spread his false narrative about our trip. A few days later, I got a call from my friend Lisa. She told me that Robbie had contacted her asking for my address because he wanted to send me a letter. Lisa had refused to give him the information, but she was concerned about why he was trying to reach me through mutual friends. This made me realize that Robbie was escalating his attempts to contact me despite being told by police to leave me alone. I decided to be proactive and got a restraining order against him. The process of getting the restraining order required me to document all of Robbie's behavior, the police incident, the family members contacting me, and his attempts to reach me through friends. When I laid out all of these events in writing, it became clear that Robbie was engaging in stalking behavior. The restraining order was granted, and Robbie was served with papers explaining that he couldn't contact me directly or indirectly, couldn't come to my home or workplace, and couldn't ask other people to contact me on his behalf. Since getting the restraining order, I haven't heard anything from or about Robbie. I hope this means he has finally accepted that our relationship is over and moved on. Looking back on everything that happened, I'm grateful that I discovered Robbie's true character before we got more serious or moved in together. I can see now that his problems weren't just about being disorganized or irresponsible. He fundamentally doesn't respect other people or take accountability for his actions. The Europe trip was actually a blessing in disguise because it forced me to see Robbie's behavior clearly instead of making excuses for it. If we had just continued dating casually, I might not have realized how serious his issues were until we were much more involved. I've learned to trust my instincts when someone's behavior doesn't match their words, and to pay attention to patterns rather than isolated incidents. I've also learned the importance of talking to other people who have dealt with someone, because people like Robbie often have a long history of similar behavior that they hide from new partners. I'm focusing on myself now and not interested in dating anyone for a while. I want to make sure I understand why I was willing to make excuses for Robbie's behavior for so long, so I don't end up in a similar situation again. Now let's move to the next story. Story 2. I caught my fiancée cheating with her ex, then she tried to trap me into raising their baby. Now she's suing me for child support. I never thought I'd be in this situation. My life has completely unraveled over the past few months, and I'm still trying to make sense of it all. I guess I should start from the beginning. I'm Miles, 28M, and until recently, I was engaged to Dakota, 27F. We met during our senior year of college at a mutual friend's party. I remember being struck by her infectious laugh and the way her eyes lit up when she talked about her passion for environmental science. We hit it off immediately, bonding over our shared love of hiking and our dreams of traveling the world. After graduation, we both landed jobs in the same city. Dakota started working for an environmental nonprofit, while I began my career in software development. We moved in together after a year of dating, and everything seemed perfect. We complemented each other well. Her spontaneity balanced out my more planned approach to life. We'd spend weekends exploring new hiking trails or trying out eclectic restaurants in the city. Our families got along great too. My parents adored Dakota, always commenting on how she brought out the best in me. Her parents welcomed me with open arms, and I became close with her younger brother, often joining him for basketball games. After 4 years together, I decided to propose. I planned an elaborate hiking trip to the spot where we had our first kiss. I hid the ring in my backpack and got down on one knee at sunset, overlooking the valley. Dakota cried tears of joy and said yes without hesitation. We were on cloud 9, excitedly planning our future together. We set the wedding date for the following summer and dove into planning. Dakota was thrilled, poring over bridal magazines and creating Pinterest boards. I was happy to let her take the lead, content to see her so excited about our big day. Everything seemed perfect until about 3 months ago. Dakota started acting different. At first, I chalked it up to stress from wedding planning. She became moody and distant, constantly glued to her phone. When I'd ask if everything was okay, she'd snap at me or brush off my concerns. I tried to be understanding, thinking maybe she was just overwhelmed with work and wedding stuff. I started planning little surprises to cheer her up, bringing home her favorite takeout or suggesting we take a day off for a hike like we used to. But nothing seemed to help. Then she started going out more without me, claiming girls' nights or work events. I didn't think much of it at first. We'd always maintained our own social lives. But the frequency increased, and she'd come home late smelling of alcohol. One night, she didn't come home at all. She texted saying she was crashing at a friend's place after having too much to drink. I offered to pick her up, but she insisted she was fine. Something about the whole situation felt off, but I tried to push my doubts aside. A week later, I came home early from work, hoping to surprise Dakota with dinner. Instead, I was the one who got a surprise. I walked into our bedroom to find Dakota in bed with another man. My world shattered in that moment. The guy scrambled to get dressed while Dakota burst into tears, begging me to let her explain. As if there was any explanation that could make this okay. I was in such shock that I could barely speak. I just turned around and walked out, ignoring Dakota's pleas for me to come back. I drove around aimlessly for hours, trying to process what I'd just seen. How could Dakota do this to me? To us? We were supposed to get married in a few months, and now everything was ruined. When I finally returned home, Dakota was waiting for me. Through her tears, she confessed that the guy was Chris, 28M, her ex-boyfriend from high school. Apparently, they'd reconnected on social media a few months back and started an affair. I felt like I was going to be sick. All those nights she was out with friends or working late, she'd been with him. The woman I thought I knew, the one I was ready to spend my life with, had betrayed me in the worst way possible. Dakota begged me not to leave, saying it was a mistake and didn't mean anything. She swore up and down that she loved me and wanted to make it work. But I couldn't even look at her. I packed a bag and went to stay with my brother, needing space to process everything. For the next week, Dakota bombarded me with calls and texts. She oscillated between apologizing profusely and getting angry at me for not responding. I ignored most of it, still too hurt and confused to deal with her. Finally, after a week apart, I agreed to meet up to talk. I thought I was ready to hear her out, maybe even consider working things out. But then she dropped another bombshell. She was pregnant. And she wasn't sure if the baby was mine or Chris's. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut all over again. Not only had Dakota cheated, but now there was a child involved that might not even be mine. She swore up and down that she wanted to make things work with me, that Chris meant nothing to her. She even suggested we raise the baby together regardless of paternity. I was furious. How could she expect me to just forgive her betrayal and raise another man's child? I told her there was no way I could stay with her after what she'd done. I needed a paternity test as soon as possible. Dakota didn't take my reaction well. She accused me of abandoning her when she needed me most. She said if I really loved her, I'd stand by her no matter what. But I couldn't get past the lying and cheating. I told her we were done for good. The next few weeks were hell. Dakota refused to leave me alone, constantly calling, texting, and showing up at my work and apartment. She told all our friends and family that I'd left her while she was pregnant. She conveniently left out the part about cheating with her ex. I tried to keep my distance and focus on healing, but Dakota made it impossible. She'd alternate between crying and begging me to take her back, and angrily accusing me of ruining her life. It was emotional blackmail and I was at my wit's end. Our friends were split. Some understood my position and supported me, while others thought I was being cruel for abandoning Dakota during her pregnancy. It was exhausting trying to defend myself and explain the situation over and over. Work became a struggle too. I couldn't focus, my performance was slipping, and my boss was starting to notice. I was barely sleeping, constantly stressed about when Dakota would pop up next or what new rumor she'd spread about me. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the results of the paternity test came back. I wasn't the father, Chris was. I felt a mix of relief and sadness. While I was glad I wasn't tied to Dakota for life, it was still painful to have my suspicions confirmed. I thought that would be the end of it. Dakota knew for certain the baby wasn't mine, so surely she'd leave me alone now. I was wrong. She showed up at my apartment in tears, saying Chris wanted nothing to do with the baby. She begged me to reconsider and help her raise the child, insisting I'd be a better father than Chris. I was stunned by her audacity. After everything she'd put me through, she still expected me to clean up her mess. I refused and told her to leave me alone for good. Dakota didn't take it well. She screamed at me, calling me selfish and saying I'd regret abandoning her and the baby. That was the last straw. I knew I needed to take legal action to protect myself. I contacted a lawyer and filed for a restraining order against Dakota. The judge granted it given her pattern of harassment. It's been a month since then and things have finally calmed down. Dakota can no longer contact me or come near my home and work. I've blocked her on everything and asked friends and family not to pass along any messages from her. I'm still reeling from everything that's happened. The future I thought I had with Dakota is gone. I'm trying to focus on healing and moving forward, but some days are harder than others. I know I made the right choice in leaving, but part of me still hurts over the betrayal and loss. I guess I'm looking for advice on how to fully move on from this mess. How do I trust again after being so blindsided? And how do I deal with the guilt Dakota tried to put on me about the baby? Any words of wisdom would be appreciated. Update 1. It's been about 2 months since my last post, and unfortunately, things have only gotten more complicated. I really thought getting the restraining order would be the end of it, but Dakota has found new ways to try and manipulate me. A few weeks ago, I started getting calls from mutual friends saying Dakota had been telling everyone that I was the one who cheated on her. She was spinning this whole story about how I'd had a long-term affair and left her when she got pregnant. It was infuriating to hear how she was twisting the truth. I spent days doing damage control, explaining the real situation to anyone who would listen. Most people believed me, especially once I mentioned the paternity test and restraining order. But there were still some who bought into Dakota's lies. I lost a few friendships over it, which stung even though I knew I hadn't done anything wrong. One of the hardest losses was my friend Tom, 29M. We'd been close since college, and he was supposed to be one of my groomsmen. But he'd always had a bit of a crush on Dakota, and he chose to believe her version of events. He accused me of abandoning Dakota in her time of need and said he couldn't be friends with someone who would do that. Losing Tom's friendship was like a punch to the gut. Then there was the issue with our shared friend group. Dakota and I had been part of a tight-knit circle of friends since college. Now, every get-together was awkward. People felt like they had to choose sides. Some friends tried to stay neutral, but that often meant excluding both Dakota and me from events to avoid drama. I found myself feeling increasingly isolated. Work wasn't any easier. Despite the restraining order, Dakota found ways to interfere. She started calling my office, pretending to be a client. My boss was understanding at first, but as it continued, I could tell he was getting frustrated. I was constantly on edge, worried that Dakota would show up or cause a scene that could jeopardize my job. Just when I thought things couldn't get any worse, I got served with papers. Dakota was suing me for child support, claiming that because we were engaged when she got pregnant, I had a financial obligation to the baby. I was floored. How could she possibly think this would work? I immediately called my lawyer, who assured me the case had no merit. We have DNA proof that I'm not the father, and Dakota and I were never married. But still, the stress of potentially going to court was overwhelming. The weeks leading up to the hearing were a nightmare. I could barely sleep or eat. I kept imagining worst-case scenarios where somehow, despite all logic, the judge would side with Dakota. My parents tried to be supportive, but I could tell they were worried too. They'd always loved Dakota and were struggling to understand how things had gone so wrong. The day of the hearing arrived and I was a nervous wreck. Dakota showed up looking smug, like she thought she had this in the bag. Her lawyer tried arguing that I had acted as a father figure during the pregnancy and therefore had a responsibility to the child. They even brought up old social media posts where I had expressed excitement about becoming a dad. It felt like they were twisting every happy moment we'd shared into something to use against me. I felt sick listening to them paint me as some heartless monster who had abandoned his family. Thankfully, the judge saw right through it. He dismissed the case immediately, telling Dakota there was no legal basis for her claims. I felt such relief walking out of that courtroom. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe again. But my relief was short-lived. That night, Dakota started bombarding me with messages from fake numbers. She went on and on about how I'd ruined her life, how she was struggling to make ends meet, how the baby would grow up fatherless because of me. I didn't respond, but it was hard not to let her words get to me. One message, in particular, stuck with me. Dakota wrote about how she'd had to move back in with her parents because she couldn't afford rent on her own. She described feeling ashamed and scared about raising a baby alone. For a moment, I felt a pang of guilt. But then I reminded myself that this was all a result of her choices, not mine. I'm trying to stay strong and remember that none of this is my fault. Dakota made her choices and now she has to live with the consequences. But there's still a small part of me that feels guilty, even though I know I shouldn't. I'm focusing on myself as much as I can, throwing myself into work, reconnecting with supportive friends, making plans for the future. I've started seeing a therapist to help process everything that's happened. It's been helpful to have someone objective to talk to. But Dakota's shadow still looms over everything. I just want to be free of this mess for good. I'm considering looking for jobs in other cities, thinking a fresh start might be what I need. But part of me worries that running away won't solve anything. I guess I'm just looking for reassurance that I'm doing the right thing by standing my ground. Am I being too harsh? Should I have tried harder to work things out with Dakota? I know logically that I'm not responsible for her or the baby, but emotionally, it's still a struggle sometimes. Any advice on how to move forward would be appreciated. How do I rebuild my life and relationships after all this drama? And how do I protect myself if Dakota tries anything else in the future? Update 2. Another month has passed and things have taken yet another crazy turn. Just when I thought the situation couldn't get any more complicated, Dakota has managed to drag even more people into her web of lies. About 2 weeks ago, I got a call from my cousin Mark, 30M. He sounded hesitant, which was weird because we've always been close. Growing up, Mark was like the older brother I never had. We spent summers together at our grandparents' lake house, and he was always there for me during tough times. So hearing him sound so unsure immediately put me on edge. Mark said, "Miles, I don't know how to tell you this, but Dakota's been talking to people in our extended family." My heart sank. I asked him what she'd been saying, though I had a pretty good idea. Mark explained that Dakota had been reaching out to various family members, telling them how I'd abandoned her and the baby, how she was struggling to make ends meet, and how cruel I was being. She'd even contacted my grandmother, who's been in poor health lately. The thought of her upsetting my grandma made my blood boil. I was furious. It wasn't enough for her to try and turn our mutual friends against me, now she was going after my family too. Mark said most people were skeptical of her story, especially since they knew about the cheating and the paternity test. But a few of my more distant relatives were buying into it. I spent the next few days calling family members, trying to set the record straight. Most were understanding, but I could tell some of them still had doubts. It was exhausting having to relive the whole ordeal over and over again. My Aunt Susan was particularly difficult to convince. She's always been a bit of a busybody, and she seemed almost excited by the drama. She kept pressing for details, asking if I was absolutely sure the baby wasn't mine. It took everything in me not to lose my temper with her. Then, to make matters worse, I found out Dakota had started a GoFundMe page. She was using my name and telling this sob story about being a single mom abandoned by her fiancé. She even posted an old picture of us together, making it look like we were still a happy couple. The description on the page was heart-wrenching. Dakota wrote about how she was struggling to afford prenatal care, how she might lose her apartment, how she was scared for her baby's future. She painted herself as this helpless victim, and me as the heartless villain who had left her high and dry. I was beyond angry. This wasn't just annoying anymore, it was full-on defamation. I contacted GoFundMe and managed to get the page taken down, but not before she'd raised a few $100s from sympathetic strangers. The whole situation was starting to affect my daily life. I was constantly on edge, worried about what Dakota might do next. I found myself avoiding social situations, tired of having to explain or defend myself. Even going to the grocery store became stressful. I was always worried I'd run into someone who believed Dakota's lies. I thought about taking legal action for defamation, but my lawyer advised against it. He said it would just drag out the drama and give Dakota more opportunities to spread her lies. As frustrating as it was, the best thing to do was ignore her and focus on moving forward with my life. It's been hard, but I'm trying to stay positive. I've started making plans to move to a new city for a job opportunity. The idea of a fresh start, away from all this drama, is really appealing right now. The job opportunity came up unexpectedly. A college friend who works for a tech startup in Seattle reached out to me about an opening in their development team. At first, I was hesitant. Moving across the country seemed like a drastic step. But the more I thought about it, the more appealing it became. I went for an interview last week, and it went really well. The company culture seems great, and the work would be challenging in a good way. Plus, Seattle is beautiful. All that nature right at my doorstep would be amazing for hiking. I haven't made a final decision yet, but I'm strongly considering it. Part of me feels like I'm running away from my problems, but another part thinks this could be exactly what I need to move on with my life. I just hope that once I'm gone, Dakota will finally give up and leave me alone for good. I'm ready to put this whole nightmare behind me and start the next chapter of my life. Update 3. It's been about 6 months since my last update, and I'm happy to say that things have finally started to settle down. I ended up taking that job in Seattle, and the move has been exactly what I needed. Being away from all the drama and having a fresh start has done wonders for my mental health. The first few weeks after the move were tough. I was in a new city where I didn't know anyone, starting a new job, and still processing everything that had happened with Dakota. There were moments when I questioned if I'd made the right choice. But gradually, things started to improve. My new job is challenging but rewarding. I'm working on exciting projects and learning a lot. My coworkers have been welcoming, and I've even made a few friends outside of work. I've joined a hiking group and have been exploring the beautiful trails around Seattle almost every weekend. Shortly after I moved, I got an unexpected call from Chris, 28M, Dakota's ex and the actual father of her baby. We hadn't spoken since everything went down, so I was surprised to hear from him. He called to apologize, which caught me off guard. Chris explained that Dakota had been doing the same thing to him, spreading lies, trying to manipulate him, and making his life difficult. He said he was trying to step up as a father, but Dakota was making it nearly impossible. She was using the baby as a bargaining chip, refusing to let him see the child unless he got back together with her. Hearing this, I felt a mix of emotions. On one hand, I was angry all over again at how Dakota was behaving. But on the other hand, I felt a weird sense of validation. It wasn't just me, Dakota really was out of control. Chris and I ended up talking for a while, comparing notes on our experiences with Dakota. It was oddly cathartic to connect with someone else who understood exactly what I'd been through. We weren't exactly friends, but there was a mutual respect and understanding between us. As for Dakota, I've heard through the grapevine that she's still trying to stir up drama back home. But being in a new city, surrounded by new people who don't know anything about my past, has given me the space I needed to heal and move on. I've started dating again, cautiously. It's been hard to trust after everything that happened with Dakota, but I'm working on it. I met a girl named Rachel, 26F, at a coffee shop a few weeks ago, and we've been on a couple of dates. It's nothing serious yet, but it's nice to feel that spark of connection again. I'm still in therapy, working through the trust issues and residual anger from my experience with Dakota. It's a process, but I can feel myself making progress. I'm learning to open up again, to not let one bad experience color my view of all relationships. Looking back on everything that's happened, I can see now how close I came to getting trapped in a toxic situation. If I hadn't trusted my gut when things felt off with Dakota, if I hadn't stood my ground when she tried to manipulate me into raising a child that wasn't mine, my life could be very different right now. I'm proud of myself for having the strength to walk away, even when it was incredibly difficult. And I'm grateful for the friends and family who stood by me through it all. To anyone else going through something similar, my advice would be this: trust your instincts, don't let anyone manipulate you into accepting unacceptable behavior, and don't be afraid to cut toxic people out of your life, even if they're someone you once loved. It hasn't been an easy journey, but I'm in a much better place now. I'm looking forward to the future and excited to see what this new chapter of my life will bring. For the first time in a long time, I feel hopeful about what's to come.